Oh man, I love this song. Every time I hear it, I can remember where I was and who I was with. It reminds me of the time. Does this sound familiar? Music is like a scent. It can instantly transport you to another time and place. I ask my guests to dish about their song with the memories that go with it. I'm your host, Tiffany Mason. I have a passion for music and a curiosity about how a song affects someone and why. Turn up your radio and let's explore Memories with a Beat. Hello, Podcast Land. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Memories with a Beat. And I am so excited for my guest today, Chris Stone. Chris was somebody that was on the PodFest AI Creators and Tools Summit. I was thankful enough to be a guest to present. And, I don't know where you guys are in the AI space, but it's really rearing its head in the podcasting space. And so everyone's kind of trying to figure out what tools they're using and what they're doing and best practices. And so that's why we were there. But we got to do these cool breakout rooms after the day, after our brains were fried from all the input of all the different platforms that we could use to streamline the podcasting production, or really any of the podcasting. And so Chris was one of those people, and he said that he used to work at Sony. And you guys know I'm always keeping my ear open for somebody who loves music. And so I have to assume if you work at Sony, you probably love music. And I know he shared a little bit about that too. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Tiffany, thank you so much. And yeah, it was great to connect. And it's like, you're in the podcasting space and everybody's doing the broadcasting and the radio. And every once in a while, music starts to weave its way into the conversation. You start to see people's faces light up on these, on these meetings. And we were fast friends and connected there with music. And this is just one of my absolute favorite things to talk about. It's just a part of my DNA. It's a part of every day for me is music in general. And so I just can't wait to chop it up with you.
Yeah, I find a lot of times I personally love, I don't know, this is going to come off maybe like conceited or full of myself. That's not the
Hey,
way
it's
I
your
want this to
podcast.
sound.
Go ahead. Just knock yourself out.
But I love extending to other business professionals like, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? But it's about music. And then they're like, oh, I would love to talk about music, something other than the daily grind of my business, which that's a great, avenue for podcasting, but it's also fun just to explore some of our hobbies and passions. So I know today you chose the song Sing, Sing, Sing. And for people who do not know this, because I did not know this, you guys, this is a song from 1937.
Do I win the prize, Tiffany, for having the oldest song ever submitted for your podcast?
I have to think so.
Okay.
Oh,
yes.
wait, what was the one? What was the one about the When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin?
When the Levee Breaks. Now, okay, so this is definitely has got that by like 35, 40 years. I'm
trying to remember when it was originally written, but yes, I think that you do win because that's when this one was recorded and it's the original. So yes, Chris, you get the award.
Great. Excellent.
So this was recorded in Hollywood by Benny Goodman and also known as the King of Swing. And I thought it was really interesting that I never took into account how long a record could have of a song, right? Like in my brain nowadays, right, we're streaming, we've got all the digital data, storage, whatever that we need. So it can be 55 minutes long if we really wanted it to be, although that'd be a really long song. But I thought it was interesting that it was an 8-minute and 43-second song, and it took both sides of a 12-inch record.
Yes. Yes. And everybody listening in now is like, why do they have an 134-year-old gentleman on this show and they're talking about a thing called a record that you have to flip over and listen to the entire time? It's like, I'm not that old, but we're going to get into it because this is a song that is, I know the show is about a memory, right? And about how music in general can spark a memory. And Tiffany, I have 3 rules for my day. Number 1 is to make my wife laugh. And
Aw.
the reason why I do that is because you can see from this face, I have a sense of humor. That's why she married me, and so I have to make her laugh every day. And sometimes it's just telling her a bad dad joke. Other times it's genuinely, that. But so when I'm on the road, I just have to remember I have to make her laugh. And so
Aw.
that's rule number one. And number two is I have to create more than I consume. And I think that's
Oh.
especially important now in what we do is, we listen to this podcast right now. We're listening to other podcasts. We watch podcasts. That's a thing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we watch videos. We consume all of these things and scroll and Netflix and all of those things. And you could be focused on something that is something you can learn, which is great. But at some point, you got to get out of your seat,
Yes.
theoretically, or maybe you just stay in your seat and go and create something. And that could be anything. It could be a video, it could be a audio podcast, it could be a blog, it could be just something that you need to create in some way, shape, or form. And so my second rule is to always create more than I consume. And my third rule, Tiffany, is to listen to music.
Mm.
And it's just because I've found that it's my fuel. It's my
Yeah.
gasoline. It's the way that, and when I say music in general, it's not one type of music. Sometimes I feel like putting on Kill 'Em All by
Right.
Metallica. Sometimes I feel like putting on Sketches of Spain by Miles Davis. Sometimes I feel like, putting on Juice World. It's just not it's something that I'm feeling, and I know it can give me some sort of creative energy. It gets those neurons firing in my head and gets me to do that rule number two, which is to create more than I'm actually consuming. And I consider listening to music kind of, that consumption thing. But it
Mm-hmm.
really is my third rule is music. So that's kind of my thing.
Well, speaking of listening to podcasts, I was listening to a
Hmm.
podcast yesterday, and she was talking about in business, what are her boundaries or what is her routine like for her day? And she said that when she drops her kids off for school, she plays one playlist, and then she does the first part of her workday, and then at lunchtime she plays another playlist, and then she does the second chunk of her day, and then the third part. So she has these musical cues to her day,
Mm,
and I thought that was really interesting. And
yeah.
I would say the same thing for me as far as my taste in music, or
Hmm.
it's almost like, you need to feel something. So, what song are you going to put it on that's going to channel that energy that you're looking for? So, I love that you said that. I had a live Temptations record playing the other day. But, you get in my car, you're going to hear country music or Green Day, or, there's a variety of music that you'll hear. So, I can appreciate that very much. You guys, this song, Sing, 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 is going to be on the playlist on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And it's just Memories with a Beat, the playlist. Very original. And I want you guys to go check out this song. You know it. You know it. It's been in a million movies. You know this song. So I would encourage you, go put it on, tap your fingers like you're playing the drums, or, get your favorite dance partner out on the floor and do a little swing dancing. But Chris, take it away how relate to the song, those
Hmm.
memories that come up when Sing 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 comes on.
Yeah, I grew up in a very musical family, and
Mhm.
my father he played trumpet in big bands. That was his thing. When he was young, he learned to play trumpet, and he played and toured with big bands. Now, not Benny Goodman's big band or Glenn Miller's big band. He had friends that they toured around whatever VFWs and all kinds of different places, and they were a band, and he played trumpet in that band. And so he had a massive record collection. And
Mm,
when I was growing up, music was always on in my household, always on, and it wasn't just swing music or big band music like my dad had a real affinity for. My mother listened to Kenny Rogers, and my brothers down the hall, they would put on Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band and Styx, and my other brother would listen to like folk music from Dan Fogelberg and James Taylor. And so there was just, and I had, every Iron Maiden record and Judas Priest and whatever. So you got this huge, goulash, this hodgepodge of music going around, and my parents encouraged it. And so we had this huge record player in the living room, and of course we grew up in this household where you couldn't really sit in the living room. I don't know why. Like no one ever sat in the living room. There was a couch, everything was nice, it was dusted every day. No one ever sat in there. When people would come over, I guess people would sit in there. But anyway, back in the 70s, they would take record players and they build them into furniture. And so you would have these speakers and these big wooden things that took up half the room that had record players, and their stereos were built into it. And there was room to just, I don't know, maybe put a couple hundred albums in there. And so I used to just love it. I would wake up on a Saturday morning and you would hear a song like Sing, Sing, Sing from Benny Goodman, or something from Glenn Miller, or the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Anything would be kind of like pumping in the house, and you would just kind of wake up and you would smell the fresh cut grass coming through the windows. And it just was that when I hear this song from Benny Goodman, which was not originally written by Benny Goodman, he did the instrumental version, which became a huge hit, but it was written by someone named Louis Prima. And of course, my dad had a bunch of Louis Prima records as well. And so that really was, when I hear this song, I hear that drum beat that Gene Krupa plays drums. He's just this amazing drummer. When I hear that, my mind immediately goes back to 1977 or whenever that was, just north of Detroit, Michigan, and that time where I would sit in front of that huge piece of furniture that had a stereo built into it, and I'd be looking at all these albums and just seeing Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Whipped Cream and Other Delights, and these huge album covers, and reading who was producing them and the lyrics and all of those things. And my dad telling me the stories about how he used to play these songs on the bandstand. And he would tell me he told me the story of Benny Goodman. He told me how he helped sort of break down the racial barrier in the mid to late 30s. There were not people of color in these bands. And Benny Goodman was one of the first people to ever have Lionel Hampton and other members of his band, people of color in his band, and he would get all kinds of slack for it from that community. And he would, he'd slap them back. He'd be like, "You say anything about that, I'm going to hit you over the head with my clarinet," And so, these are the stories that my dad told me when I was growing up, and I just feel like this song was so intrinsic in catapulted me into being, being more creative, creating more music, being in bands ever since I was, 13, 14 years old, and playing with other people just because, my parents really encouraged it.
Yeah. As you explained waking up to the music, I felt like I was watching it on TV, like Leave It to Beaver, and your mom's got her pearls on, and your dad's smoking a cigarette, reading the Saturday morning paper.
They would dance together sometimes, and so I would. That's a happy memory for me. I would see them just kind of like bopping around, dancing to the music. So yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome. I wonder, so lots of times people will say that they're older siblings. So is it just two older brothers?
I've got 3 older brothers.
Okay, 3 older brothers. Okay. Mm-hmm. And would you say one of them was more instrumental in your specific music? I guess the one that you like the most? Reason being I'm asking that is a lot of times people will say, "Oh, my older brother introduced me to this music. Mm-hmm. My older brother had these records and I just had to play them because I wanted to be cool like him." Would you say one of your brothers was more influential than the other? And the follow-up question is, did you guys have to fight over who got to play their record next?
Yes to all that. I'm here for it. Yeah. So I had 3 older brothers. The 2 oldest brothers had a different father. And so they were adopted by my biological father. And so they were a little bit older. And my next oldest brother, Jeff, he and I shared the same father and were closer in age. So he and I were a bit closer. Over the past 10 years, I've become closer to my oldest brothers. But my next oldest brother, Jeff, who I shared a father with, his taste in music it didn't go as hard as mine. And so he was the one that was into like Dan Fogelberg, and he was really into contemporary Christian music. And I really wasn't into that. And, at the time there wasn't there wasn't things like, it just wasn't great for me. It kind of, and so he was into that stuff. And my older brothers were more into like, Fog Hat and, more just kind of rockin' stuff that my parents kind of hated a little bit. And so,
Okay.
being a younger kid, and of course,
But they
the
liked
parents
Iron
hated,
Maiden?
well, I hid the Iron Maiden records,
Okay.
actually, to be
Okay.
honest.
Okay.
Ride the Lightning and Number of the Beast didn't make it to the top of the stack. I had to put that,
Okay.
back there so I didn't, but
Yeah, that's kind of the
yeah.
beauty of records, right? There wasn't the
Hmm.
spine. So they couldn't
Right.
tattle on you what was at
Right.
the bottom of the stack unless they knew the cover art.
Exactly.
And even then
Exactly.
it'd have to be like something unique, like yellow or red.
Right. Yeah, and it's not like I could jam those things in the middle of the day when my parents were home, right? I just,
Right.
it's like when they weren't home, then those albums came out. But yeah, my older brothers were more influential with sort of like the genres of music I was in, and that my dad, because he was a big band, sort of jazz player, none of my brothers were into jazz at all. But since I started playing, my other brothers didn't play instruments at all, but I started playing the
Yeah.
bass guitar because every band needs a bass player. So this was the easiest way
Right.
for me to get into a band, was to learn how to play bass. But I fell in love with that instrument. And I fell in love with jazz. I fell in love with,
Mm.
mid 60s bop and hard bop music, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk, like all of those, were really great fuel for my learning and how to put together compositions and things like that. And so, none of them were into it, but I felt like my dad's music was, kind of pushed me into there, and kind of like, like if you listen to the song "Sing, Sing, Sing" by Benny Goodman, and you hear the way that's put together, the orchestration, it's crazy what's going on. It's like they're coming in with different tempos and different rhythms, and the way that whole thing is orchestrated with the band. Some of the best musicians that you'll ever hear. And then if you see some of these videos that are up on YouTube from these big bands, are just incredible. The musicianship that each of them have, and so. Yeah, I really got into a lot of jazz music, as well as, the harder edge stuff and everything in between. I'll get into traditional country. I have a lot of respect for, a lot of different genres, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it makes you a well-rounded consumer of music because,
Hmm.
like you're doing with your business now, you're not mixing music, but you're definitely, there's some of that creativity and some of that, you have to match things a little bit flawlessly, right? If you will.
Hmm. Yeah, well,
And
I would say there is a lot of music in what I do. And a lot of what I learned from putting together and writing music, I apply to the podcasting space.
mhm,
But a lot of the videos that I do, especially for repurposing, and then maybe some
yeah,
some music that I would put on an audio podcast, it's an important part. It's not an afterthought. It's never an afterthought for me. I feel like music is just an intrinsic part of what we should be. It's a soundtrack for everything. And so
for
a
sure.
lot of the social videos that I do for myself, for my company, and for the shows that I do, and the clients that I serve, music is never an afterthought. And so you'll hear things like, if something's a little sort of like, if what's being said is a little off kilter and kind of funny and shows a sense of humor, the music is going to be a little more. It's going to be it's going to be a little more, kind of almost cartoonish, but not
Mhm,
cheesy. And
yeah,
it's always going to complement what's being said. And so the music is not out front, right? It's not
right.
like you're turning on something in order to hear music, because someone's like watching a video and listening to a video. They don't want to really notice the music, but you want that music to complement and sort of drive what's being said. So it's something that I feel like is underutilized, and usually the last thing that people think about when they think about doing a podcast or using a video to promote a podcast is the music that should accompany what you're doing, and how you can really utilize it to set yourself apart from a lot of the mediocre stuff that you see out there.
Yeah, I find that I ask a lot of my clients, in your intro, in your outro, we're
Hmm.
setting the stage for the content of your podcast. So, are we evoking professionalism, playfulness? Like, what is that emotion you want that listener to start to have before you say, "Hey, welcome to the podcast?" Like my music is kind of like this meandering down an old dirt road. That's kind of how I pictured it in my head. And so,
Hmm.
it's just like a little tumbleweed plopping down the road as my intro is going along, and again, that was intentional, so I understand that completely.
Yeah.
Got a podcast? Are you loving it, but not loving how much time post production takes? Or maybe you just have other tasks calling your name a little bit louder. Virtually You can help. Check out virtuallyouva.com, supporting you in all things podcasting like editing, show notes, audiograms, and much more. See the link in the show notes. They're waiting to give you back your time. And on that note, let's get back to the show.
With your dad, and you had said that, you kinda liked everything, that he gave you that appreciation for the composition, and so I wondered, I mean, being that you picked up the bass guitar, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I don't know if that's part of a big band, if that's one of the pieces of a big band.
Sure.
I feel like it's not, but maybe it is,
It
but I'm
is.
wondering. Oh, okay, it is.
Yeah, like
So
a
did you
big,
ever learn.
the difference between, like what I play, which is typically an electric bass that you plug in,
Uh-huh,
you
uh-huh.
see them on stage. In big bands, they were like what they call doghouse basses or stand-up
Oh,
double basses, the big,
sure.
but it was a bass. It was more felt than heard in a big band
Yeah.
situation. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, you're fine. So, did you ever learn to play Sing Sing Sing?
I have not. Are you
Oh.
challenging me, Tiffany? I think I have a challenge.
Well, how fun would that have been to play with your dad? I
Yeah.
didn't know. I mean, did you ever play any music with your dad?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we
You just
goofed
kinda played
around a
in the
little bit.
house?
I think
Yeah.
by the time I was like to a point where I was playing bass in the house, like he had his trump. Every once in a while he'd bust it out and he'd just kind of play a little bit. But
Uh-huh.
when you step away from playing the trumpet for years and you go back and you try to
Mm.
play it, it really takes a while. He would say, I have to get my lip back. That was
Mhm.
his thing. Like you have to kind of like it's not something you can just pick up and put down for 5 years, pick it back up and you start playing, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we goofed around a little bit and but not nothing to where it was like, hey dad, let's learn, something
Sing,
and
sing, sing
play it
together.
together. That would have been something that was great, to be able to do. But he ended up, declining health, passed away a number of years ago. But,
Yeah.
I do have his trumpet here in my studio. So yeah, it's
Oh,
something
how
that
cool is
yeah,
that?
absolutely. That was the one thing that I wanted that I basically, there was no fight with my brothers on that. They knew that trumpet
Yeah.
was going to me. So,
Oh, that's so sweet. When you explained the waking up to the music and
hmm.
this would be, a normal song to hear, is there lots of times when we hear these songs when we're younger, we can remember other times in life where these
Oh
songs have
yeah.
kind of come into our life. So, is there another time? Did you play it a tribute to him
Hmm.
you, at graduation? What other experiences have you had with this music?
Well, I do remember that, as they, well, my mother, she stayed in great health until she had a sudden stroke and passed, but she took care of my dad as he had started to get into his declining health. And his mind was going before his body, really. But so he had people that were taking care of him while my mother did other things. And he
Mhm.
had all of this music, and it was some of it was on CD, some of it was on cassette, some of it was on vinyl or whatever. And I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this stuff and I'm going to digitize it. Right, this is when
Oh,
iTunes is
cool.
out and whatever, and I'm going to put it all on the computer and put it all on an iPod. And I know he's not going to be able to figure out how to use any of this stuff, right? But the
Right,
people
right.
that are with him
Of
will.
course.
So they're
Mhm.
younger and they understand how all of this works. And as my father was sort of getting more and more declining in his health and his mental health or whatever, it was always a thing where I could sit with my dad, play music, play this song, and he would immediately go. It was almost like all the lights went on in his head. and we were right back sitting down there, listening to, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass or whatever. And he would tell me some of the same old stories like it was the first time he was telling me.
Yes.
And, and it's wonderful how music it does that. And so here he was, he couldn't remember what he had for breakfast an hour ago, but he was telling me the same stories about Gene Krupa and seeing, Stan Kenton in a club in 1961, and all of these same stories that he had told me, and music brought his mind back to that moment.
Yeah.
I worked for Sony for years, and there were certain moments in the career that I had where I would hear, I worked particular albums, I was a part of it, and then you hear a song, all you got to do is hear like one note of a song and you just immediately go and you hear it. My wife is over it because like like my dad, I'll tell Chris, you've told me that story like 100 times. Stop, right? But like I'll hear a song from Sarah McLachlan off of Fumbling Towards Ecstasy, and my mind immediately goes back to when we did an in-store signing, at Tower Records in Nashville, like when the album first came out, and there's 600 crying girls at the front of the store while she's playing the song Ice Cream, and then I had to get her over to the autograph table. And the record executive from Polygram says, "Hey, I have one thing before you get here. I want to introduce Sarah to one of our new artists. This is a new artist that we're having coming out. She's got an album coming out next month called Tuesday Night Music Club. This is Sheryl Crow." And I'm standing there. I'm like freaking out because I'm like, I have to get Sarah McLachlan across the store because there's 600 people that need to sign CDs and cassettes. And I have to sit here and wait for this record company executive to introduce his new artist. And at the time, no one knew who Sheryl Crow was.
Right.
And I'm standing there 1 foot away from Sheryl Crow meeting Sarah McLachlan for the first time.
And if you only had known at that point.
Right. Right, exactly. And so
it must be wild to reflect now and be like, oh my gosh, there was another gentleman on that was telling me about meeting Taylor Swift. And, at that time, she was no one. So, hey, how's it going? She would come play between sets of this band. And they just didn't know who it was then. But to look back now and be like, oh my gosh, totally met Sheryl Crow.
Yeah. I think what I learned from that, Tiffany, was let's not take anything for granted. I mean, you never know who you're meeting, what you're doing at any point in time. Like you and I connected on this Podfest AI thing, and, all of these things. Like today, you and I are having this conversation. I take these things very seriously. Like you and I are having this conversation. We're having fun. And it's not like I took 16 hours to prep for this interview or anything like that.
Right.
But at the same time, like I'm taking this very seriously because you never know when someone can hear, any podcast that you do, any video that you do, anything you do might be impacted, and not just impacted right this minute, because it's not just about this minute. We're recording this. Right. Somebody could hear it 20 years from now, and maybe they're impacted by it. And I might not be alive. And so that's kind of the way I look at it is, I know that's getting too deep. Maybe we should go back and get lighthearted. But I think if we treat things with a little more importance, then it feels more like almost a legacy. Like if we can make things a little bit more impactful and a little bit more special while we have the opportunity to do it, and don't just wing stuff. I
was just going to say, that's why we should always be doing the best that we can at all given moments.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll fumble and screw up, but, just learn from it and move on and do the next one better.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cassettes, I was going to ask if you ever got Sing, Sing, Sing on cassette or CD. And then again, a follow-up question to that is, you kind of mentioned it, you kind of gave away your answer maybe on the record, but when you would get a new record, CD, cassette, the leaflet or the, writing on the album cover, what was most important to you? Do you feel like you were just dying to learn the words, or was it really more about, who's produced this, who had their hands on this? Do I know them? That kind of thing.
I have owned many Benny Goodman releases on CD,
Yeah.
Cassette, maybe not. Vinyl, definitely. I got rid of all of my CDs, almost all of my cassettes. So somewhere there's a vinyl album of Benny Goodman and Sing 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 and the Louis Prima original version of that
Yeah.
somewhere. What was the second part of the question?
If you know, like when you would see the lyrics
Oh, right.
or the credit for who produced the music.
Yeah, I did at the time because I think I'm not one of those people that's like, oh God, I just wish it was like the old days where you could just open up the gatefolds and just, because at the time, MTV didn't exist and visuals and the internet and things like that didn't exist. And so what you had was the album and the pictures. And so that's, when you listen to an album and you really wanted to lean into it, you had to be there in front of it. You didn't have speakers that like Sonos that goes through your home or a phone in your pocket that you can walk around with Bluetooth headphones. So listening to an album was definitely more of an experience, and you'd put on these big cans on your head and close your eyes and vision things and read and just kind of like, so it was part of the experience. Now it's not. And I do that sometimes. I'll go in there and I'll sit down and I'll look through stuff. If it had lyrics, great. I was always like really into seeing the visuals, right? The pictures and all of that. That's why I think when video hit for me, that was really something that I thought was great. I think people now talk for podcasts about how video, but the audio has to lead in this, right? There's no such thing as a silent podcast. And so I think when you talk about the visuals and you open it up and you look at the picture of, I don't know, Bob Seger on stage in Detroit, and here's all of his band members and all that. But if you're not listening to the song Kathmandu and hearing, Bob Seger, over top of it and then go, what did he say there? And then you can look at the lyric. Like all the visuals are a component of it, but the music is what is just the river that's flowing. And, you're not going anywhere unless you have that audio. So that was really my thing is I was there listening to things and looking at all the albums and sharing that stuff with my dad and hanging out with my friends when we were listening to AC/DC, and other things in their houses and stuff like that, and hanging out and doing whatever friends do when they're listening to AC/DC in their rooms. And, but I'm not one of those people that is nostalgic about saying, oh boy, I wish we could go back to that. I'm like, it's just not. That horse is way out of the barn and down the field, and it's gone. So it's like people are enjoying music in different ways, and it's I love the fact that it's a lot more ubiquitous. When streaming music became a thing, I was like, oh my God, gee, this is just the most amazing thing ever. I've got 60 million songs that I have in my pocket.
Yeah.
And I can do it. I was never one of those people that said, "Oh, this is just this is compressed and it's 1/32 the quality of this, and it's never going to work." It's like, no, this is amazing. This is you can consume so much more, and you could be exposed to so much more, and you can listen to a podcast with Tiffany Mason, and they can talk about sing, 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 and you can go, I wonder what that song sounds like, and you can pull it up in 2 seconds, and it's amazing. I think that's awesome.
I love the evolution from you just loving the pictures to then loving MTV. And now, I mean, you're kind of the MTV of podcasting, right? Like you're kind of, you're kind of bringing it to life in a visual sense for people
Video
now.
killed the podcast star by the Buggles. Yes, that's how this is going to work.
Or is it video highlighted the podcast star?
There we go. Look, you even sang it. You knew it. You knew the Buggles song right off the bat.
That has been going through my head
now.
Ever since you said MTV. Because we all know that was the first video. So
yeah.
Anyways, well, Chris, this has been such an awesome, fun conversation.
Thank
I
you.
always get nervous when there's not words to a song because I'm like, okay, but it is about that connection and those memories. And so I love what you shared. And
well, there are words. there are words to this song. It's like the instrumental version was done by Benny Goodman. The original version by Prima does have words. And part of the reason why I didn't pick the words, Tiffany, just is I know we're going long here, but part of the reason is it's the song's from the mid-30s. And so if it's not necessarily the deepest lyrics you're ever going to get. I mean, the song was made for people to dance, and so and it's called Sing Sing Sing. It is not. It's it's the shallow end of the pool in terms of of lyrical depth, but it's just one of those things where the music itself, even without the lyric, even just the vocal as an instrument, for me can inspire.
Yeah, I think that's totally normal. I think that there are people who I need the story. There's people like my husband who just love how the song makes them feel, and then there's people like you that really appreciate both ends of the spectrum. And, you don't need one or the other to appreciate the music. So I think that's totally normal. Yeah.
I've never been called totally normal. So thank you, Tiffany. I'll take that as a compliment.
We'll see if you can play that Sing, Sing, Sing on your bass.
Oh, I've been challenged.
Okay, well, Podcast Land, look forward to listening or to hearing Chris's release of the bass guitar of Sing, Sing, Sing. That's coming up. I will put it in the show notes as soon as it's available.
Wow.
Otherwise, I hope that Chris's memories to this song stick with you like the memories to your favorite song. Podcast Land, thank you so much for listening. If you had a few memories of your own pop up with this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, tag me on social, Tiffany Mason, or virtually you, and share those memories. I know y'all are listening, and I'd love to hear the memories you were reminded of with this song. Also, would you do me a favor and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it? This is the best way you can help me to grow my audience. Can't wait to dive into my next guest's memories with a beat. Hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss the next episode.